I was filling in the closing form of the case when I heard the doorbell of my house touch the Viva Foster of my cell phone. 3 touches, a break, and her old recording. Love, I go down and come back in 10 minutes. But this message was recorded 10 years ago, and that night the bread was still hot. The sound of the message echoed in the room, impregnating the air with a heavy, almost palpable nostalgia. Each word was a painful reminder of a time that seemed to have been frozen, a minute that never passed, perpetuating the feeling of absence. 10 minutes turned into a decade of waiting and uncertainty, a void that took care of every corner of the house. I remember the moment as if it were yesterday. She was radiant that night, wearing a blue dress that danced around her like a light breeze. His eyes shone with a return promise, and the smile that cast me before leaving was a silent guarantee that it would soon be back. But the minutes dragged on, stretched until they became years, and I remained standing, a prisoner of a time that did not advance, while the world around me continued to rotate indifferent. The bell rang again, bringing me back to the present, and I felt a shiver through my spine. It was as if every touch is mocking my impotence, my failure to find answers. I got up slowly, the closing form of the case falling forgotten on the floor. That roll was an attempt to move on, to end a chapter that refused to be closed, but her message was a cruel reminder that some stories never find their end. As I walked toward the door, I felt the weight of each day without it. The house, which was once a vibrant home, was now just an empty echo of laughter and conversations that disappeared. Each room kept his memories, an absent presence that was still feeling in small details. The forgotten coffee cup on the table, the book opened on any page, the blouse that still kept its perfume. I opened the door with a mix of hope and resignation, as if that simple gesture could somehow change the past. But the street was empty, as always. It was just the night, wrapped in a heavy silence, that greeted me. I closed the door slowly, trying not to make noise, as if the smallest sound could break the fragile balance of my world. I went back to the living room and leaned back in the armchair, my heart still beating an unzipped pace. The recording repeated again, echoing around the house as a persistent ghost. Love, I go down and come back in 10 minutes. I closed my eyes, trying to repress the avalanche of emotions that threatened to consume me. Anger, sadness, love, all mixed in a confusing and endless whirlwind. But at the bottom of all this, there was a spark of something more, a silent determination that refused to be erased. I knew that somehow I needed to find an outcome, a way to free myself from that endless minute. And although the years had passed, I still had the hope that one day she would really come back, and time, which seemed to have stopped, would finally start to flow again. With a deep sigh, I took the floor form, determined to finish what had started. Even though the closing of the case did not bring answers, at least it would be a step in the right direction, a chance to finally leave that minute behind and seek somewhere a new beginning. It was Saturday, 9:12 a.m. The thin rain that fell outside gave a smell of wet earth to the street, an aroma that was mixed with the steam of the tea that was beginning to boil in the kettle. The sound of the whistle was echoing through the kitchen, a family melody that calmed me while she was preparing to leave. His light steps reverberated around the house, and each movement looked like a choreographed dance of a routine I knew well. She tied her hair with a simple elastic, an automatic gesture that made dozens of times a week. I looked at her and saw the blue sweatshirt that embraced her body comfortably, the white sneakers that had already lost the brightness of new ones, and the absence of makeup that made her natural beauty even more evident. She had that ordinary morning aura, a carelessness that made everything seem so right, so eternal. Just around the corner, 10 minutes, he said, with a quiet smile that made me forget about the outside world, the problems that accumulated in my mind. He took some pots from his pot on the table, a gesture that was part of a silent and constant ritual. Watching her, I felt a passing serenity, a suspended moment in time. As she left, I stayed on the stove, counting mentally. 10, 20, 30 seconds. The kettle whistle increased as if I alerted me something I still didn't understand. The sound was urgent, an insistent reminder that time was passing. When I finally turned off the go, the silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating, and I realized that there was something strange in the stillness that filled the house. I looked at the clock on the wall, hoping to find the confirmation that the 10 minutes had really passed. It was 10:10. There was something disturbing on how those pointers moved, mercilessly, without giving any indication that she was on her way. Theoretically, she was 2 blocks away, but a sense of discomfort began to settle in my chest, growing with every passing second. The street was silent, the rain now just a soft whisper against the windows. Time seemed to be in collusion with the uncertainty that spread inside me, every tic-tac of the clock a beat that echoed her absence. An absence that, until that moment, I did not know I could resonate so much. I passed my fingers through the cold window of the window, trying to see beyond the veil of water. Every drop that slid down the glass seemed to take with it a part of my quiet, leaving only a remnant of doubt and anxiety. I remembered her words, 10 minutes, and grabbed them like a promise, a faint hope that I would soon see her folding the corner, wrapped in the morning fog. But as the minutes turned into 1 hour and then in two, the restlessness turned into a tight node in the stomach. All day long spent a blur with attempts to distract my mind, but nothing could ward off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I looked at the blue sweatshirt hanging from the room chair, as if at any moment it would appear and take it, smiling back to me as it always did. But time continued to pass. In Klesmint and the certainty that she would not come back that day began to solidify, a shadow that hung over each thought. It was at that moment, absorbed in doubts and uncertainties, that I realized that my life was about to change forever. Something inside me began to shatter, a crack that would become an abyss over the years. The 10-minute promise had become an eternity waiting, and I was about to enter a world that I had never imagined exploiting. I left home with her red umbrella, an object that suddenly seemed to carry the weight of a whole world. The rain still fell soft but incessant, creating a curtain of water that distorted the reality around me. The vibrant red of the umbrella stood out against the gray of the sky, like a headlight, amid the fog of uncertainties that surrounded me. I walked through the wet sidewalks, the sound of my steps a lonely echo on the silent morning. The bakery was there, as always, a constant comforting in the midst of the inner chaos I lived. The unmistakable smell of newly breaded bread floated in the air, trying to calm my nerves in shakes. I entered, the bell above the door tilintando, a sound that seemed to mock my anxiety. The attendant, a young boy with a smile always ready, lifted the coffee machine's gaze as he saw me. "The blue sweatshirt?" he asked, recognizing me right away. I nodded, my heart beating unbridled against my chest. He pointed to the security camera, his dark screen like night. "The energy fell right at that time," he explained, an apology in his voice. The hope of finding any track there faded as quickly as it arose. I thanked, trying not to let the disappointment show, and I left. The rain still fell, a constant memory that time didn't stop, even when my life seemed frozen. I crossed the street toward the newspaper board, the lady of always setting the covers of magazines that no one else read. She saw me approach and frowned with sympathy. "I saw a white car," he began, his low voice as if he feared that the words could bring some unwanted truth. It stopped around the corner with the flashing arrow. The engine was tuned, but no one left. I heard the door knock, but I didn't see anyone get in. Her words were like pieces of a no-sense puzzle, increasing the mystery further. I returned home, the red umbrella now heavy in my hand, as if I absorbed every drop of despair I felt. The corner, which was once just part of our daily lives, now seemed like a place of shadows, a point of disappearance and silence. She had a feeling she had fallen into a hidden pocket in space-time, a place that had sucked her presence so completely that she had left no traces. Within me, concern became a storm of emotions, anger at impotence, sadness for absence, and a growing determination of finding answers, no matter how long it took. Every step towards our house was a step closer to confronting reality, that perhaps time was not the only enemy. Upon entering the family again, Iadada of our home, I felt silence to fall upon me like a heavy cloak. The house was the same way, but now it seemed different, as if the space between the walls had expanded to accommodate the void left by it. The sound of the door closing behind me reverberated through the corridors, echoing the closure of a chapter of my life. I sat in the armchair, the red umbrella still dripping on the wooden floor. I closed my eyes and, for a moment, let myself take by memories. Every laugh, every conversation, every shared moment. The corner that swallowed people was now a symbol of everything I had lost, but also a starting point for a search that I didn't know where I would take me. In the stillness of the room, I promised myself that I would not leave that story without an end. No matter how long it took, I would find her, would bring back the light she had taken with him. And as the silence of the house wrapped me, I felt a spark of hope to light up inside me. I was not ready to give up. Not yet. The sound of the tires on the wet asphalt was the only company as I drove to the police station. The raindrops running down the windshield like silent tears. The red umbrella lay in the passenger seat, a constant memory of her absence. Upon entering the police station, the smell of reheated coffee and old papers involved me as a cloak of bureaucracy and despair. The officers welcomed me with tired looks, used to seeing faces like mine, full of hope and fear. "Wait 48 hours, they said, as if this sentence could offer some comfort. I argued, begged, but the rules were clear, relentless. I knew every minute I told, but for them it was just another procedure to follow. I left the police station feeling even more powerless, the rain now a soundtrack for my frustration. Her phone had been out of area since 10:12, a detail that made my mind turn in circles of worry. The last antenna to capture his signal was under the Avenue Viaduct, a place that seemed to resonate with the incessant sound of trucks and the penetrating smell of diesel, a scene that until then meant nothing but a point on the map, but now it was the epicenter of my despair. The protocols began to take shape. Posters with their face, interviews on local radios, a thorough scan in hospitals and passenger lists, the inspection on the bus station. It was like setting up a puzzle without a reference image, each piece an attempt to find the path she had taken. But with each failed attempt, the absence of any solid clue turned into an abyss that I could not fill. Then came a detail that made my heart accelerate. A A strange record. Her card was used 4 hours later to pay a coffee in a convenience store 180 kilometers away. The hopes I tried to control exploded like a volcano, but as the puzzle pieces that never fit, the camera of this store was erased by maintenance. Once again, reality hit me like a cold wave. In the invoice, the printed time, 10:10. Again, the same time that was repeated as a torturous echo, a coincidence that made no sense but could not be ignored. It was as if the universe was sending me a coded message that I was unable to decipher. Back in the car, I sat for a moment, my eyes fixed on the indistinct horizon. The rain still fell, and the red umbrella beside me seemed a symbol of everything I had lost and the determination I needed to find. I needed to understand. I needed to believe that there was a reason for all this, a hidden answer somewhere between the lines of reality. While driving home, a thought began to take shape. Perhaps, just perhaps, those 10 minutes were more than just a mistake in time. Perhaps they were the key to a larger riddle, an invisible path I needed to go. And so, with a renewed determination, I swore that I would not rest until the mystery that stole the 10 minutes that became a decade of absence. Each kilometer traveled was a promise that I would not give up, not until there was a thread of hope to follow. I would find her, cost what it cost, because those 10 minutes, after all, were much more than the time it was left. It was the beginning of a search that would define not only the present, but every moment I still had to live. 6 months turned into 2 years, a relentless time flow that eroded any trace of hope I was still feeding. The faces that once offered me words of comfort and empathy became distant shadows, and the previously unimaginable silence became my constant companion. Her absence was a black hole that sucked everything around her, leaving only a deafening void. Theories began to accumulate like dust in an abandoned room. Some said she had chosen disappearing, forging a new identity somewhere where no one could find her. Others, would she had been the victim of a lightning kidnapping or even a human trafficking network. I clung to every hypothesis like a castaway to grab a piece of wood, hoping that somewhere among the assumptions were the truth. I dived headlong into an underground world of information. Missing blogs, conspiracy forums, truck route maps that crossed the country. My office became a chaotic operations center. Papers spread everywhere, red wires connecting photos and places, in a mural that looked out of a police movie. Each new track was a spark of hope that was quickly erased at the cold reality. A trucker once told me a peculiar story. He swore he hitchhiked a woman who looked like her, but who exchanged her name to every passing city. I wanted to believe it, but his words were as foggy as the fog that covered the roads at dawn. My mind oscillated between hope and skepticism, while time continued to pass merciless. A former colleague said he had seen her on the subway, a detail that made my heart accelerate until I discovered that that day the subway was on strike. It was as if the universe was conspiring against me, each track becoming another ruin of expectation. It was then that I received the call from Delegate Mora. She had reopened the case, not for a miracle, but because another similar disappearance had occurred. "He left for 10 minutes and never came back," she said to me, her voice loaded with a concern that mirrored mine. The dates were different, the distant cities. The 10:10 mark came again, as a persistent ghost in invoices, watches, and even on parking slates. Coincidences like these were not just tiring, they were scary, as if his time himself had become a malicious entity, playing with my hopes and fears. The view of a pattern emerging in chaos gave me goosebumps, and I didn't know if I should feel relief or terror. With the reopening of the case, a new breath of life was injected into my search. Delegate Mora, a woman of the hard expression and unshakable determination, became my ally. Together we review every detail, every testimony, every document that could contain a track. She shared with me reports from other similar cases, each stranger than the previous one, like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit in. As we worked, the theory of a greater conspiracy took shape. What if there was something deeper, an invisible network connecting these disappearances, a hidden truth that no one dared to face? The thought was both terrifying and electrifying, an idea that was rooted in my mind and compelled me to continue despite the growing despair. But as the days turned into nights, and the nights into days, one thing became clearer and clearer. I wouldn't give up. The shadow of 1010 hanged over my life as an unfinished sentence, and I was determined to find the endpoint. The world could be against me, friends could have disappeared, but as long as there was a trail, as cold as it was, I would follow it to the end. The search for her was no longer just a personal mission. It was a battle against the inexplicable, a duel of the time that refused to reveal its secrets. And as I walked through this lonely journey, one thing was certain. No matter how long it took, I would find it. Because those 10 minutes, which turned into a decade of absence, were much more than a mere clock failure. They were the key to unraveling a mystery that promised to change everything. On the 10th anniversary of the disappearance, a sense of restlessness hovered over me, like a persistent shadow. The day dawned gray, a perfect metaphor for the emptiness that had settled in my life since her disappearance. He was at home, contemplating the pile of papers that accumulated at the table when the intercom played. interrupting my thoughts. It was the porter, announcing an unexpected delivery. I went down with my mind in a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The porter extended me a brown envelope. The roll was worn out, as if he had traveled for a decade to reach me. The stamp, dated 9 years ago, seemed to mock the inexorable passage of time. There was no sender, just an address that no longer existed, like an echo of something that had faded. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope, feeling that the content could be the key to finally understanding what had happened. Inside, I found a photograph that froze my heart. It was her, stopped in front of a convenience store. The blue sweatshirt, so familiar, seemed to shine against the facade of the store as if he wanted to highlight his presence in a world that insisted on forgetting it. His face was serene, just like the day he had left for the last time. But what really made me stunned was the timely stamp in the corner of the image. 1010, the same time that was repeated as a damn chorus in our history. I turned the picture, and written on the pen, I saw the words that jerked my blood. Do not open the door before 22 to 10. The accuracy of the message hit me as a blow. I had already opened without realizing the temporal trap that may be armed for me. The before was a late warning, a warning that I had disregarded in my ignorance. I felt a wave of panic take over me, as if reality were fragmenting in my hands. Without wasting time, I called Delegate Mora. His voice on the phone was firm, but I realized a note of concern when I explained the situation. Keep calm, she said, although she knew it was a request almost impossible to fulfill. I took the photograph to the police station where the skill confirmed what I feared. The paper and the paint were compatible with the stamp date. It was as if time, in his unpredictable dance, had decided to play with our perceptions of reality. Even more disturbing, the convenience store where the photo was taken was closed for 8 years. Its doors had been locked, its dusty corridors, forgotten by all except for those who now tried to decipher this puzzle. Something, or someone, was delivering messages over time, or perhaps manipulating our certainties. That night, I sat alone in the room, the watch marking 21:55. Every passing second seemed to lengthen infinitely as I pondered the implications of the warning. What if I had followed the orientation? What would have happened? The questions echoed in my mind, without answers, only theories that intertwined in a fabric of possibilities. At 22:10, the silence of the house was almost deafening. I looked again at the photo, looking for some details that could have gone unnoticed, but his expression was a mystery that was not deciphered. At that moment, I realized that I was dealing with something far beyond the understandable, a force that challenged logic and reason. Over the following days, the photo has become an obsession. Each line, each shadow, seemed to tell a story that I was still not able to understand. Delegate Moore and I launched ourselves in an investigation that led us to a tangle of clues, each more confusing than the previous one. The only certainty was that time, somehow, was being manipulated, twisted in a game that I was barely beginning to understand. And so the search for her continued. Now, with a new layer of complexity, a challenge that required not only to find answers, but reimagining everything we knew about time and reality. What once seemed like a simple case of disappearance became a cosmic puzzle where each piece revealed more than one could see at first glance. In the loneliness of the night, with the photo illuminated by the soft light of the lamp, I made a silent promise. No matter how long it took, no matter how many obstacles I faced, I would not give up. Because, in the end, those 10 minutes that had become a decade were much more than just a mark on the clock. It was the prelude to a mystery that, once unraveled, could change everything we knew. Mora was immersed in yellowish papers, her eyes frantically traveling lines of text, seeking patterns that could provide answers where before there was only silence. She had become an invaluable ally, her determination rivaling mine. As I watched the delegate work, a part of me felt grateful that he was no longer alone in this search that seemed to challenge his own logic. 3 cases, all with the same pattern of disappearance, she said, her voice hoarse for lack of sleep. 10 minutes. Always 10 minutes. And always 10. 10. Her tone was of almost tangible certainty, as if unraveling an old riddle. If it is a human work, it is a meticulous ritual. If not, she left the phrase in the air, silence filling the space between us with disturbing possibilities. I returned home with my mind seething. It was as if each track were a thread that, when pulled, threatened to shred all the fabric from what I understood for reality. I decided to revisit the beginning. The corner where she disappeared, the newspaper board, the bakery, places that had been scenarios of a painful past for so long, but now could contain the key to the mystery. In the bakery, the attendant, now with gray hair and wrinkles that told his own stories, receives me with a nostalgic smile. I remember that day, he said, his voice loaded with melancholy that fit perfectly with mine. The radio was just a squeak, 10 exact minutes as if time had stopped. His words were a revelation, a detail that somehow had escaped through the cracks of time. When he left, the sound of a thin tinnitus reverberated around me, as if the street was tuned at a frequency that only now I was able to realize. It was an almost imperceptible sound, but it resonated inside me, a vibration that seemed to be in tune with what I had failed to notice for so long. It was as if the street itself had its own story to tell, a sound slit between this world and the next. Back home, I looked at the old red umbrella she loved so much. For years, he had been a symbol of hope, but now it seemed to contain more than just memories. The splashes of mud, which I always supplied to be of our walks, revealed themselves as a crucial track. They tested the earth. It was not from our street, but of a little busy road near the convenience store that had been closed for 8 years. This previously insignificant detail now assumed a monumental meaning. It was as if each element, each piece of the puzzle was slowly aligning, revealing a pattern that had hitherto remained hidden. The convenience store, with its locked doors and empty shelves, became a focal point, a place where time seemed to have bent over itself, keeping secrets that refused to be buried. And so, while the night wrapped the city on its dark cloak, a new understanding began to form in my mind. Perhaps what we faced was not just a disappearance, but an intersection of realities, a point where time and space intertwined inexplicably. It was a frightening thought, but it also offered a new hope. Because if we could decipher the puzzle, we might find a way to bring time back to its course and, with it, bring it back. With a renewed determination, I decided that I needed to investigate the road, the store, and anywhere else that could keep fragments of answers. He knew the way would be long and lonely, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that it was a step closer to unraveling the mystery that robbery not only 10 minutes, but an entire decade of our lives. And as the clock continued its inexorable march, I promised myself that it would find the truth, no matter what it revealed. I returned home with the envelope and a clear order of Delegate Mora. If you hear the bell, call me. The weight of the warning still resonated in my mind as I crossed the doorway. The stove clock marked 21:58. An invisible tension hovered in the air, as if the house itself was holding my breath, waiting for something I could not predict. Suddenly the lights blinked, plunging the room a brief moment of darkness. When they lit again, my cell phone vibrated, locked for a moment before mysteriously restarting with the screen showing 22:10. It was impossible. The wall clock was still 22:03. A shiver traveled my pimple, and the squeak, that family and disturbing, echoed through the pipe, the pole outside, and somehow seemed to resonate inside my own chest. At 22:10 exact, the bell rang, a sound that cut silence like a knife. My heart jumped, a breakdown jump that seemed to align with the insistent sound. I went to the hesitant door, each step echoing the accumulated doubt for 10 years. The magic eye revealed an empty corridor, an extension of real estate shadows. I opened the door, just a hand, afraid, but immediately I was hit by an intense and familiar aroma, the unmistakable smell of hot bread, the same smell that had impregnated the morning of his disappearance. On the carpet, a plastic bag was resting, stamped with the bakery logo that had closed 9 years ago. My fingers trembled as it took it, the texture of the family in strangely comforting plastic. Inside, 2 loaves, still steaming, as if they had just left the oven. The shredded change was there. The same coins she had taken that morning, each with the year brother, in law before her disappearance. Finge marks were visible in the package, arguably hers. The bag was dry, with no traces of the rain that had toasted that fateful morning. The phrase, "Do not open the door before 22:10" resonated in my mind like an echo, a warning that I had finally obeyed, but doubt persisted. And before? When did the door open without considering the warning? It was as if his time itself was playing with me, offering fragments of a past that refused to remain buried. The sense of unreality was almost over Ghidorah. I put the breads on the table, every detail tangible that something impossible was happening. I tried to call the Mora delegate, but the line was dead, an electronic void on the other side. The constant and unsettling tinnitus seemed to intensify, as if he wanted to warn me of something he couldn't understand yet. I sat in the chair, my eyes fixed on the bread that was slowly cool. Every second that passed, a cruel reminder of the time it didn't stop. The questions accumulated in my mind, a whirlwind of uncertainty. How was it possible for the change? The coins were there, intact. And the smell, the touch of the still hot plastic. It was as if that brief moment of 10 years ago was repeating, but with a different outcome. The now louder shadow seemed almost to form words, a lost communication between dimensions. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down my rapid heart, and focused, seeking a hidden meaning in that cacophony. Perhaps, I thought, there was a message, a truth that refused to be ignored, something that connected that moment to her disappearance. A clue I needed to decipher. The time, which once looked like my enemy, was now a strange ally, offering me a second chance to understand. And while the night deepened, bringing with it shadows and mysteries, I promised myself that I would not let this opportunity pass. Because, in the end, those 10 minutes that had become a decade were not just a time failure. They were a portal, a passage to find out what really happened, and perhaps bring back what I thought I lost forever. Her voice echoed through the kitchen, a presence that seemed to challenge the laws of time and space. My heart stopped for a moment when he heard that familiar word, love, as if stuck in a scene from a movie that refused to move forward. I turned slowly, each movement loaded with unbelief and hope. And there she was, just as I remembered, wearing the same blue sweatshirt, the white sneakers that had lost the shine, as if time had not passed. The drop of rain hung on her hair was such a small detail, but at that moment it seemed to contain the whole universe. Her wrist clock marked 10:12, a time that suddenly seemed to have a meaning far beyond what I could understand. She looked at me with a slight worry expression, as if she didn't understand my astonishment. The line was big. "Why are you pale?" It took me a long time. My hands trembled, shock and emotion mingling in a frantic dance inside me. How to explain? How to summarize a decade in a word, in a gesture? "You left for 10 minutes. My voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. "It's been 10 years. Her laugh, crystal clear and light. It was a song that I hadn't listened for so long. But soon that laugh died on her lips when her eyes landed on the walls. The photos, silent witnesses of the past time, told stories she didn't know. Nephews that had grown, wrinkles that the mirror showed me day after day, new frames that did not belong to the world she had left. Her expression changed, a mixture of confusion and fear taking over her face. "What day is it today?" she asked, the thin voice and shaken like a leaf in the wind. I showed him the date on my cell phone, and the silence that followed was oppressive, as if the world was waiting for our next movement. The squeak, that persistent and annoying sound that had become a part of my daily life, ceased abruptly, leaving an almost palpable void. The coin, which she had probably stored in her pocket before leaving, fell to the floor and rolled, a metallic sound that echoed through the kitchen until it stopped at 2210, recorded on the verse of the envelope on the table. I didn't remember leaving the envelope there, but its marks were unmistakable. It was as if time, in his capricious will, had decided to unite all the loose lines of our history at that moment. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands and dialed the number of Delegate Mora. She answered in the first touch, her firm voice being an anchor amid the emotional whirlwind that consumed me. "She came back," I managed to say, every word loaded with an emotion that I couldn't name. Silence, after my statement, was deep and full of meaning. She was back, and the reality of what it meant began to unfold into my mind. On the one hand, there was immense relief, such a pure joy that I could barely contain. But, on the other hand, there was an abyss of questions, a sea of doubts and mysteries that were waiting to be unveiled. She was there, but the world had changed, and we were at a point of intersection between what it was and what could have been. Tears began to drain through my face, a release of years of pain, longing, and uncertainty. "She approaches." He cursed hesitantly and touched my face, the gesture so familiar but loaded with a new weight. And in that closeness, I felt that, although time had passed, what we shared was still intact, waiting only to be rediscovered. As reality slowly adjusted around us, I realized that our journey was just beginning. There was a past to understand, a gift to live, and a future to rebuild. And while the Delegate Mora prepared to help us unravel the mystery of what had happened, I felt that, for the first time in a long time, I was not alone, and that more than any answer was what I needed most at that moment. Delegate Mora and I were sitting in the police station's conference room, surrounded by piles of reports and evidence, trying to gather the fragments of a puzzle that seemed to challenge the laws of physics and logic. Forensic analyses confirmed what was already an undeniable fact for me. The bread was still hot, the DNA was undeniably hers, and the wristwatch had stopped at exactly 10:12, restarting at the very time at 22:10, just as the bell had played. But what did these details mean? It was a question that tormented us. She was at home in the kitchen, trying to adapt to a world that had advanced 10 years without her. His expression, a mixture of fascination and strangeness, reflected the internal struggle to understand the passage of time he had not experienced. It was as if it had been transported through a temporal tunnel, emerging on the other side without any memory of the journey. For her, it was only 10 minutes. For me, an eternity of pain and uncertainty. Delegate Mora, always pragmatic, named the phenomenon of break event, a technical name that, although cold, captured the essence of what we tried to understand, an inexplicable break in the flow of time. Something happened between 10:10 and 10:12, something that challenges our perception of reality, she said as she examined a diagram that tried to illustrate the impossible. Maybe a temporal failure, a lapse between dimensions. The bakery attendant, a simple man who had witnessed the inexplicable, only shook his head when we told him. "Miracle, I would say," was his answer, his wide eyes with amazement. For him, there was no need for scientific explanations. The world was a place of mysteries, and perhaps some of them were not made to unravel. The lady of the stand, seeing the red umbrella, made the sign of the cross, murmuring a silent prayer. It was as if the object, with its vibrant fabric and impregnated memories, were a sacred relic, a silent testimony of the extraordinary. She, with her wisdom of years, preferred the protection of old beliefs for the search for rational responses. For me, however, everything was a message. Time, that concept we consider linear and inviolable, had shown itself full of nuances and mysteries, hidden pockets that kept secrets, alternative paths that could be traveled by those who unknowingly stumbled on their banks. We had fallen into one of these pockets, and although we were back, what really happened between 10:10 and 10:12 remained a riddle. While the city around us continued its indifferent routine, I saw myself stuck in this issue. What had caused this lapse? A cosmic failure? A divine intervention? Technology beyond our understanding? The theories were many, and each more fantastic than the previous one, and yet all offered a glimpse of something larger, a truth that always seemed to be a step beyond reach. In the intimacy of our home, as she explored what was now a new world, I pondered the meaning of all that. We may never have definitive answers, but one thing was certain, that experience had transformed our understanding of time and space. Now every moment together was a gift, a reminder that time, though fleeting, could surprise us with his whims and wonders. And so, I leave the question to you. What really happened between 10:10 and 10:12? An anomaly in the fabric of reality, or a glimpse of the still unknown? Leave your theory in the comments, because in the midst of so many uncertainties, perhaps the truth resides in the stories we share. I will read them all, seeking in your words a fragment of understanding that can illuminate this mystery. After all, time, with its hidden pockets, taught us that the impossible can sometimes be the purest reality.